Hello, good afternoon, and welcome to Thursdays with Friends, our online conversation on current issues. This is our 25th episode. Awesome. And we noticed that many of you like to have a cup of coffee or tea while listening. It's kind of the perfect time of day for a cup of tea. So, to mark our 25th episode, we will be mailing mugs to those among us who have attended the majority of the Thursdays with Friends episodes. I know I have only missed one. Um, so, I'm looking forward to having a mug and joining you with that. Moving forward, that mug will also be a prize for the person who asks the best question in each episode. So get your questions ready. Feel free to ask them early, and we will try and get to them for our question of the week mug. I'm the show's producer, Wesley Wolf-Bear-Pinkham, and here's our chat host for Thursdays with Friends, FCNL General Secretary Diane Randall, and her guest, Ursala Knudsen-Latta, FCNL Legislative Representative for Peacebuilding. Over to you, Diane. Let's see, make sure, Diane, you can unmute yourself.
Okay, can you hear me now?
We can.
Okay, I'm sorry. I was playing around with my computer too much and I got sidetracked here, but thank you very much, Wesley, for that introduction. And thank you for this new exciting premium we have of mugs that we're willing to share with people, and we're looking forward to distributing those. So let me say that we have a real treat here today in our program with Ursala Knudsen-Latta, who is our peacebuilding policy legislative representative and who does a tremendous job on a whole range of peacebuilding issues. But today we're going to be talking about landmines. Last weekend was on April 4th, we marked International Landmine Awareness Day, and we did social media around this. Many of you know we're on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and we tried to put up a lot of posts. It's a way that we can get the word out on this. I remember myself becoming aware of the devastating impact of landmines on civilians during the war in Southeast Asia. But I've learned from Ursala that landmines began being used actually during World War II, more than 75 years ago. And it was not until 1992 that a group of 6 non-governmental organizations worked together on the international campaign to ban landmines. The campaign was given a Nobel Prize in 1997 when the International Mine Ban Treaty was agreed upon. And 80% of the world's countries have ratified the treaty. The United States has not. And civilian casualties from landmines that were planted decades ago continue to rise. In 2019, 54% of the casualties were children. So this afternoon, Ursala, who is, as I mentioned, is our Peacebuilding Policy Secretary, and who prior to coming to FCNL did policy and advocacy work at Safer World's Washington, D.C. office, has also chaired the U.S. Civil Society Working Group for Women, Peace, and Security for 2 terms. She knows a lot about gender issues and peace building. Ursala received her bachelor's in religions and theology from the University of Manchester in the UK. She also holds a master's degree in international peace and conflict resolution from American University. And so I want to welcome Ursala, and just to say that I know that you've not only been leading FCNL's current advocacy, and we're going to talk a little bit about our historic advocacy as well, to ban the use of landmines by the United States, but you've also been leading the US campaign to ban landmines congressional advocacy. So let me just say welcome and ask you to start by giving our viewers a brief update on the state of US landmine policy.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this week has been a week of breaking news. We had some more today. So I will try and give a brief update for all of our wonderful attendees. And thank you, Diane. Thank you, Wesley. Thanks to all of our generous donors and advocates for supporting our efforts to build peace and for joining us today to learn more about landmines. Pretty much every president since the 1997 Mine Ban Treaty came into force has somehow changed our policy. It's been a game of ping pong back and forth. In 2014, President Obama instituted a policy that banned their use anywhere outside of the Korean Peninsula and banned any research, production, etc. of new landmines. Unfortunately, in 2020, near the end of his term, President Trump reversed that policy and once again allowed for the use of the US military to employ, develop, produce, or otherwise acquire landmines, and to remove any geographic limitations on the deployment of those landmines by the US military. Like I said, previously it had only been allowed on the southern Korean border with North Korea. This policy still stands under Biden. And the breaking news is that this week they reaffirmed that they are keeping the policy for the meantime. So President Biden had made a commitment during the campaign to promptly reverse this policy reversal by Trump to go back to the Obama era policy. And this week, the Department of Defense did come out and say the current Trump era policy stands. And that policy, though, is under review. And thanks to a lot of noise that advocates, including FCNL, have been making over the last several days, this afternoon at the UN Security Council, our US ambassador to the United Nations, Linda Thomas-Greenfield, stated very plainly that President Biden intends to roll back this policy and that they have begun to do a policy review to get to that rollback. So it's caught in a bit of bureaucratic mess, and that's why we need to keep the pressure on them so that this review doesn't turn into a perpetual situation.
Wow, that really is breaking news. We prepared yesterday for this, and we had a whole different, not a whole different, but we didn't have this recent news about our ambassador to the United Nations making this statement, which is encouraging. So one of the things that I think, Ursula, you can do for us is help sort out a little bit of the players, and in terms of what Congress does, what the administration has to do, what a timeline might be, because I think ultimately we are hoping that this treaty will be ratified by the United States. And then specifically what the FCNL network can do, because as you all know, we always have an ask. That is, we always have something we would like you to do in relation to your members of Congress. So talk to us a little bit more about specifically, what are you doing on the Hill and what are you hearing as you talk to members of Congress?
Absolutely. So the treaty, first of all, for a little bit of background, the treaty is closed for signature. So the only way the US can join the treaty is full ratification. So while President Biden, with the stroke of a pen, can change the presidential directive and change US policy to once again ban the use of landmines, to join the treaty, we need the Senate. So the US campaign to ban landmines and FCNL have been working over the last 18 months, I guess just under 18 months, to meet with dozens of offices on the Hill and really push for bipartisan support toward ratification. Like I said, we are putting pressure on the Biden administration to say, you can go back to the Obama era policy, you can, take steps now, but they need to submit the treaty as a treaty package to the Senate for ratification. And we want to see that ratification happen by 2023. Each previous administration has sort of set these in a decade, we will get to, in 15 years, we'll find the time to join the treaty and we'll be compliant. No, they've had enough time. That 2023 is when we hope to see US ratification of the mine ban treaty.
So it's been 25 years since President Clinton actually spoke about this at the UN General Assembly, both for a ban on anti-personnel landmines. So why hasn't the United States ratified the resulting mine ban treaty? And then to say just a little bit more about the role of whether the House has any role in this, because we talked about this yesterday, because it really, the Senate obviously is the body that ratifies treaties. So give us a little bit more about why it's taken us this long and how we're looking at what influence the House might have and how we're going to get to the necessary votes on the Senate side.
Absolutely. So why hasn't, the US, who, as you said, President Clinton stood before the UN General Assembly and called for an international agreement to ban these weapons. So thanks in part to US leadership, efforts by the international campaign to ban landmines, and the world came together in Ottawa to sign the 1997 Mine Ban Treaty, created a global consensus. 164 countries, including all of our NATO allies, have joined the Mine Ban Treaty. And as a result of the once 50 mine producing countries, 41 have ceased production of these weapons altogether. The biggest issue US policymakers have struggled with is the Korea question, or how would the US defend Allied troops from a North Korean ground invasion across the DMZ. The US initially said it would sign the treaty if it could get a carve out for the Korean Peninsula, but the treaty body rejected that carve out. And rightfully so. And, it's important to note, though, that activists and retired military leaders alike have made clear that the US doesn't need this exception, including former commander of US forces in Korea, Lieutenant General James Hollingsworth, who said, quote, "Not only civilians, but US armed forces will benefit from a ban on landmines. US forces in Korea are no exception." And so what our advocates can do and what the House can do is push your members of Congress to state clearly and on the public record that they support the Mine Ban Treaty and a ban on landmines. With sufficient pressure from the House, President Biden is more likely to take executive action. With sufficient pressure from the House, their colleagues in the Senate are going to feel that and take the ratification more seriously. So even though the House might not have a role in the official ratification process, their voice definitely matters in this.
Right. They are elected officials. They do have a responsibility for the actions of this country, and they should be, even if they're just using their platforms to weigh in, and it doesn't ultimately mean they vote, their voices are obviously very, very important. So we are going to take questions from people in the chat, but before we get to that, I want to just ask you to describe a little bit more about what the Mine Ban Treaty actually requires of countries, of the nations that sign it, and what changes would we see in terms of civilian deaths or casualties from existing landmines.
Yeah, so the Mine Ban Treaty requires only a few key provisions. One, that parties to it not develop, produce, acquire, use, retain, or transfer landmines or help others do it, to destroy all current stockpiles, to identify and clear mined areas under their control and help others to do so, to provide assistance to landmine victims, and to report annually to the UN on their progress. The emphasis of the treaty on not just preventing new use, but on stockpile destruction, mine clearance, victim assistance has been profound. While some states are still working to destroy their stockpiles, since 1997, 53 million stockpiled anti-personnel landmines have been destroyed, and another 4.6 million have been cleared from the ground. I mean, that is a huge sea change. And the international campaign to ban landmines has called on the world to finish the job, which is the name of their campaign, by 2025. And it believes that it is possible to clear the remaining contaminated land in the next 4 years. It's a huge job, but it is possible.
So one of the things I think you talked about is that the US is providing funding for some of this work to clear landmines. And obviously that's important. And we are working in coalition with other partners that are advocating for that, I know. One of the things that's, clearly banning landmines fits into FCNL's vision of a world free of war and the threat of war. but it also fits into the vision of an Earth restored. We talked a little bit about the impact that these landmines have on communities and the environmental destruction they do, as well as the humanitarian and death and destruction of people. Can you say a little bit more about sort of what it means for an area, a nation, to have landmines that are located in a particular area, what it does, in addition to potential devastating humanitarian harm?
Yeah, I think, one of the great tragedies of landmines is that decades after conflicts end, they continue to inflict harm and suffering on populations. Once an area is known to contain landmines, it becomes off limits to local communities. Farmers can't farm, children can't attend school, infrastructure can't be built, communities become displaced. I think one important impact as well is that when you live with that fear and that tension, trying to build peace and trying to build reconciliation is so much more difficult because you are living in that trauma of the conflict day in and day out. And complicating this is how landmines are delivered in the modern era. We no longer hand in place mines. We don't dig a hole, put a landmine in, and mark it on a map. We shoot it out of artillery and we drop it out of planes. So once we know a general area has landmines, the whole area has to be very carefully demined and cleared. And not only do these mines seep toxins into the soil that can have devastating effects, animals often step on them, especially larger animals, which can have devastating effects. And I think people probably have seen photos of elephants with prosthetics as a result of landmines, particularly in Southeast Asia and in Africa. And so it is clearing these mines helps us find a world free from the threat of war, helps us find an earth restored, communities where everyone can, achieve their potential. It really has such multitude of impacts.
Ursula, we are getting some questions, and someone actually just commented on the devastating impact this has had on wildlife, in particular elephants. But I want to go to some of those questions. But before we do that, I want you to talk you informed me when we were preparing for this about IEDs and their relationships to landmines. So could you say a little bit about that? Because that's really the kind of device that we've been hearing as being so destructive. So what's the relationship between IEDs and landmines?
Yeah, and I think it's important to note, children in Libya just this past month died as a result of landmines. They weren't necessarily the landmines that we might have in our public imagination related to World War II, related to the wars in Southeast Asia. An IED is an improvised explosive device, and it falls under many of them fall under the categorization of an anti-personnel landmine, which is basically any device that detects the presence of its victim and goes off based on that presence. So many, I believe it's around 40% of US casualties in the war in Afghanistan are related to IEDs. That statistic might not be exactly right, but a huge percentage of them have been from IEDs. And we have been hearing about IEDs on the news for tragically several decades now. And I think it is important to remember that those are landmines by another name. They aren't factory produced landmines. But what happens as well, when we leave our landmines behind, we leave the explosive remnant with it. And that in turn provides an opportunity for non-state groups to harvest that explosive remnant, for lack of a better phrase, and use it in their own IEDs against Americans and our allies. And so it's unfortunately a modern take on landmines.
Is that a compelling argument with senators, or as you've been, tell us a little bit about the conversations you're having in Congress, and just say a little bit more about what ratification takes, because it is a tall mountain to climb at this point in time to get ratification in the U.S. Senate. So let's just talk about that challenge that's before us.
Yeah, and I would say to start with a positive, Senator Leahy, Chairman McGovern on the House have been amazing allies on this issue for decades. Representative Jackie Speer and the whole UXO caucus, Unarmed Explosive Ordnance, UXO, Unexploded Ordnance Caucus, sorry, not unarmed, unexploded, Exploded Ordnance Caucus have been great allies on mine clearance in particular. And I think the biggest thing is members of Congress understand the humanitarian side. One staffer said to me the other day in a very conservative office, my boss doesn't believe in killing children. They were very clear that these are, low bar, these are indiscriminate weapons, that these have a disproportionate impact on children. They get the humanitarian side. Unfortunately, there is a tendency, you could say, among some offices on the Hill to defer to the Defense Department, to their expertise on these issues, and to follow their lead. And so, like with our nuclear program, like with our work on the AUMF, it's about pushing Congress to do its job and to really push back against these arguments that DoD is making, and to be a bit more of the moral voice in these conversations.
Thanks for raising that. That connection you just made in terms of where Congress is willing to step forward and actually act from maybe what's in their, what they understand is the right thing to do, and not defer to a limited set of maybe people from the Department of Defense or military people. And I think that is a message that we can give. Obviously, Friends are going to give a moral message about the inhumanity and the destructiveness of these weapons, and the randomness in some cases of how they affect people, and the complicity of this country. Somebody did ask a question about to what degree, what are the other countries that are still using landmines, and sort of where does the U.S. rank in terms of our use, our historic use of this. And I think there's so many moral reasons for us to push really hard to see this treaty ratified and to be part of the effort to eliminate this kind of weaponry forever. But it will take voices being raised and really pressing our elected officials to do so. Do you want to comment about sort of where the U.S. fits in the whole situation right now in relation to other countries?
Yeah, unfortunately, we're not necessarily holding great company. In the last 6 years, only the government forces of Syria, Myanmar, and North Korea have been shown to have used landmines, as well as non-state actors, like I was saying with the IEDs. China, Cuba, India, Iran, Myanmar, Pakistan, and others continue to produce landmines. And I will say at the moment, one of the great opportunities about what's going on right now is that the US actually hasn't restarted production yet. We haven't taken the next step. We changed the policy on paper, but we haven't deployed the landmines. We haven't started reproducing them. So changing and going back toward that ban is, we still are in a space where we haven't done more harm except toward the global norms. The longer it stays on paper, the more likely it is that we could see production, that we could see new use. So unfortunately, we're not keeping great company with this policy, but the fact that we haven't acted on it yet, I think, gives us a good opportunity.
So a couple of questions, one in the chat. One is, Mary Lou asks, why does the Department of Defense lie about these weapons? So let me ask it a little bit different way. Are there people in the Department of Defense who support the treaty, because sometimes, the Department of Defense obviously has a position, but sometimes we find allies who understand and you actually cited, a general who spoke out against landmines. So what do you, if you could prognosticate, given sort of the latest breaking news that we heard at the UN today, what do you think will happen next in terms of the the DoD review, and what we might expect from this White House, given President Biden's commitments on the campaign trail?
Yeah, I think we have seen retired DoD leadership speak out against these weapons. The Vietnam Veterans for America did an excellent report, unfortunately in the 90s, with many of the leadership who had fought in Southeast Asia and the Korean Peninsula speaking out against these weapons. So I don't think there is a sort of uniform black box of the military where everyone is sort of speaking with one voice. I do hope to see action on this, and I do hope to see President Biden reverse this policy and go back to the Obama era policy, which banned their use anywhere but the Korean Peninsula. However, it's easy to say you're conducting a review and to sort of let it sit there and let it stay in a review for many months. So I think pressure is so necessary to keep that on and to push on our, elected representatives in the House and the Senate to call on President Biden, to put pressure on him, and to show as well that there's bipartisan support. This has traditionally been a bipartisan issue, and making sure it stays that way, I think, is really critical.
Well, we're about out of time. So I want to just say, I know Joe Volk is on this call, and Joe, in his capacity as Executive Secretary of FCNL, worked tirelessly on this, along with many people who are on this call who advocated for banning landmines and for that treaty. And we are really pleased that FCNL has been able to play a role in this again, Ursula, and that you're providing leadership. And I just want to echo Ursula's plea to all of you on this call, and to, if you're part of a Quaker meeting, or if you're not a Quaker or part of another faith group or another organization where you can convince people to talk to their elected officials about this, sometimes even 2 or 3 contacts in a congressional office can perk up the ears of a member to say, oh, people are paying attention to this. And that's what we need right now. We need your voices going to your members of Congress. Ursula, any final words before we close out for the day?
I would just say my thanks as well to Joe Volk and all my predecessors at FCNL. Part of the reason we took leadership in the US campaign over the last 12 months is because FCNL has traditionally had leadership in the campaign and has, at different points held chairpersonships and all sorts of roles. So really thankful for all the work that came before me, and just like Diana was saying, our elected officials aren't hearing from us about this issue. It hasn't gotten a lot of press coverage. A lot was going on in 2020. And so every email, every phone call makes a big difference and puts it on their radar that they need to make a public statement, that they need to be on the record about this. So any help you can give, we've made it really easy for you at fcnl.org/ban-landmines. And you'll find a little email form that you can send right now. And, as you log off of this, stay at your computer and send a quick email.
Thanks, Ursula. And I know that Stephen has put that in the chat. I just want to echo what you said. One of the things that's fascinating about FCNL in Washington, D.C., and I know many of you know this, that if there is a peace issue that Congress is interested in, they frequently come to Friends Committee on National Legislation, because we are known for working arduously and with people across the country on issues that that we really do believe will end the threat of war and try to end war. I mean, that is a noble and a goal that we will consistently press on. And so thank you, all of you who financially support this work that allows us to lobby in Washington and that allows us to reach out across the country and engage those of you on this call, but also thousands of other people who are willing to work with us. So you will hear more about this in the weeks and months to come. If you don't hear anything immediately, it's because there's a lot of other issues that may be more pressing most immediately that we're emailing about, but there will always be something on the website that you can go and find and share with others. And I know Ursula looks forward to, particularly if you have a Republican senator who you think would be interested in a more in-depth conversation. We are really interested in engaging more on this issue. So let me echo the thanks. And let me just remind you that we have another Thursdays with Friends in 2 weeks. Ursula's colleague, Shakria Delawar, who is the coordinator for the Prevention and Protection Working Group, another peace building network of many organizations that FCNL helped found and staffs right now, will be my guest. And it's fascinating to learn about how this work started, but also what we're doing right now. So I hope you'll join us 2 weeks from today. And then our next Thursdays with Friends after that will actually be on May 13th. And we're hoping to invite one of our colleagues in Washington, D.C., who's doing some fascinating work on racial justice issues across the spectrum. And we'll know more about that in 2 weeks. So thank you again for joining us and for all of your support, and happy spring to everyone.